Welcome to the Parallel World Library, where we explore strange and fascinating stories in other dimensions. Now, let's relax your body and take your mind to another world. Number 13 Mint Street by TunaV. Chapter 38 Dark Clouds 1.
Sir, we've arrived. 45 Lu.
What?
45 Lu.
All right.
Sylvan couldn't carry his small treasury around but usually kept a few hundred Lu in his pocket. He took out a 50 Lu coin from his pocket. The driver took it, smiling and saying,
Thank you for your generosity.
Ah?
Sylvan could only nod, accepting the fact that his 5 Lu had become an irretrievable tip. Getting out of the car. The taxi had already left. The taxi fare was really expensive. 50 Lu was enough for a family of 4 to cover living expenses for a day, and that's with 3 nutritionally balanced meals. And from Crown Dance Hall to Mint Street wasn't even that far. At this moment, Sylvan recalled the feeling of taking taxis in New York City, staring at the red numbers on the taxi meter jumping up from the base fare. No hearse was parked by the roadside in front of the Inmare house, proving that the uncle's group hadn't returned yet.
Ah, yeah.
Looking at this building called home before him, Sylvan's heart was considerably more complex.
Police? Report? Accident, not secular demon.
The keywords from the gray-dressed woman's words echoed in Sylvan's mind. The fact that they could receive police notifications so quickly about the dance hall accident meant their identity wasn't ordinary, and moreover, it was related to secular demons. At first glance, this world seemed very normal. At least, one could draw that conclusion from newspapers and books. But the truth, it seemed, was different. Everyone has the instinct to seek benefits and avoid harm. Previously, Sylvan had single-mindedly wanted to leave this house and live a normal life, which had to rely on his own efforts to make it wealthy and peaceful gradually, but now he suddenly realized that under this world's seemingly ordinary surface, an undercurrent existed. The grandfather at home had been constantly considering whether to kill him or not. Still, until now, grandfather's actual actions were imprisoning him. As long as he didn't actively try to escape from Loggia City, he wouldn't touch the taboo. But outside, it was like a world of witch hunting.
How can you not be a secular demon? How can you not be a secular demon?
Mr. Hoffman's growls from the hospital bed still echoed in his ears. His left hand was once again clenched tight. Although Sylvan wasn't clear about the detailed concept of secular demons, his identity as a body-possessing revenant had deviated from normal concepts from the beginning. He clearly recognized that he wasn't genuine merchandise. So, was the outside worth escaping to? Contrary to the hidden dangers outside, grandfather's image suddenly became much more benevolent. The time when grandfather should have killed him most was during those days when he had just awakened. During those days when grandfather didn't move to kill him, it seemed like grandfather was considering it. But as time passed, people would automatically relax and would gradually adapt and become familiar. After all, Sylvan wasn't like his previous ignorant self, spending every day at home just eating and sleeping, always sulking as if everyone owed him 10,000 Lu. He was now sensible, obedient, and docile. Grandfather's anger and killing intent would naturally gradually decrease over time. Staying in this house would actually be safer. Just then, Sylvan saw Dis approaching from the west, wearing priest's clothes. Sylvan just stared at him, unblinking, until even Dis's face showed a hint of confusion, stopping in front of Sylvan.
Grandfather, you're back.
Sylvan pushed open the door and entered the house with his grandfather.
Father, you're back.
Aunt Mary immediately looked towards Sylvan, saying,
Your uncle called from the hospital, asking me to watch if you'd returned. He said other funeral homes' hearses also rushed there at that time. To prevent losing orders, he couldn't wait for you and drove to the hospital first. When he returns, I'll scold him. That place just had an accident. There were even deaths. It must have been very chaotic. How could he leave you alone there?
Usually, Aunt Mary was iron-mouthed but soft-hearted towards Sylvan, and in front of grandfather, even her mouth could become soft.
Aunt, I've grown up. How can an adult not even know how to get home? No matter where I am, I can always follow the warmth of home to return.
Dis sat down on the sofa and asked,
What happened?
Aunt Mary gently patted Sylvan's shoulder, then went to the second-floor kitchen to prepare refreshments. Sylvan sat on the sofa opposite Dis, telling Grandfather about what happened at the Crown Dance Hall. Chapter 39, Dark Clouds 2. When he got to the part about discovering the corpse hidden under the stage, Aunt Mary, who was just putting tea on the table, couldn't help but cover her mouth to stifle a gasp. Although she was an excellent mortician, that didn't mean her courage was any greater than ordinary people. She wasn't afraid of those corpses because she had come to see them as a kind of customer, and after becoming familiar, she had no fear of the dead, like snake handlers who aren't afraid of snakes. But with this kind of perverted killer, who could be sure they wouldn't target you, perhaps one day you could also become a customer in the house. Sylvan described the corpse in detail and the content of his exchange and analysis with Police Chief Duke. Initially, he had planned to keep these details to himself. After all, he wanted to develop some relationships and connections quietly. But after meeting that woman in the taxi, Sylvan had changed his mind. Grandfather, you see, your grandson not only knows how to cook and provide psychological counseling, but can also help the police solve cases.
Good Lord, Sylvan, you deduced all of this?
Aunt Mary exclaimed from the side, her face bearing an expression that, though uncomprehending, suggested it was imposing.
How did you think of all this?
Simply put, it's about position replacement thinking.
Sylvan tried to simplify the complex, not only to explain it to his aunt, but also to his grandfather. After all, Dis wouldn't ask directly like the aunt did.
Putting yourself in the killer's perspective, based on the clues and details the killer left behind, understanding why the killer did these things.
Dis took a sip of black tea, calmly asking,
Can you easily replace the role of a killer?
This easily brought to mind the saying, birds of a feather flock together. Sylvan immediately explained,
Grandfather, aunt, normally speaking, the more a killer feels they're an artist, the easier their thoughts are to guess, and the easier it is to put yourself in their place to make connections. Some people will feel they're very special, such as the lonely type who dislikes socializing. More than 90% of these people aren't good at socializing. The remaining might be good at socializing but prefer solitude. The overly sentimental type, whose inner heart is full of melancholy, will more easily empathize with people and things, always having a desire in their heart to express their feelings, wanting to record and preserve their thoughts and emotions. Most people around 30 who haven't achieved anything, regardless of gender, will mistakenly believe they're born writers. The more people pursue distant goals, the more they think they're special, and above others, the more ordinary they are. In short, their thinking is very predictable. When they eventually break the boundaries of humanity, starting to kill for pleasure, they transition from human to wild beast. And how many beasts truly have wisdom?
Sylvan explained a lot in one breath, then took a big sip of tea after finishing. Dis listened, pondered, and said,
Very novel reasoning.
So, before, when I watched movies and novels, the villains inside were all competent. Were these all deceptions?
Aunt Mary asked.
There are special cases in everything. Aunt, most literary and artistic works tend to emphasize drama and conflict, generally depicting villains that way.
Sylvan took the teapot, pouring more tea for his grandfather, then continued.
A smart person will know how to restrain their murderous desires.
Aunt Mary patted her chest, saying,
That's right. Surely there must be more good people among intelligent people.
The house phone rang and Aunt Mary went to answer it.
All right, I understand.
Hanging up. Aunt Mary's face was full of joy, but seeing her father-in-law still sitting there, she tried to control her smile. However, this inner joy was hard to maintain completely, making Aunt Mary's expression somewhat stiff.
Father, Mason just called from the hospital. The injured person who was taken for emergency treatment has died. His family has agreed to let us handle the funeral. Mason will bring the body back in the evening.
So late.
Dis asked.
because they're still waiting for the family of another victim to arrive, the one who had part of his head sheared off. When the hospital contacted his wife, she still firmly believed her husband was currently on a business trip in Wien. Mason also wants to wait for her to come to the hospital and conveniently secure that order.
When someone has just passed away, their relatives often become somewhat numb, seeming to become puppets who've lost their ability to think. Moreover, there's a kind of inertial thinking, wanting to give the deceased a proper funeral quickly, to let them rest in peace. So basically, whichever funeral company can make contact first at this time is very likely to get the order. Dis nodded, saying,
All right, go prepare.
Yes, Father.
Chapter 40, Dark Clouds. 3. Aunt Mary had gone to the basement to prepare for the customers. Sylvan saw Dis still sitting on the sofa and hesitated to leave.
Aren't you afraid?
Dis asked.
Seeing scenes like this.
Not very afraid.
Sylvan answered.
During this time, I've gotten somewhat used to it.
You seem to have something else you want to say.
No, Grandfather? What could be between us that can't be said?
Dis stood up.
I'm going back to my study.
Yes, Grandfather.
Sylvan stood up, watching Dis's figure disappear up the stairs before sitting back on the sofa. Actually, he wanted to ask Dis about secular demons and conveniently asked about the woman in that taxi. But thinking again, he felt it wasn't the right time. This paper-thin wall, even though it was almost transparent, still played a significant role. Sylvan worried that if he went straight to the point, Grandfather would patiently explain the concept of secular demons to him, carefully introduce him to another aspect of this world that ordinary people couldn't know about, and help him analyze which organization that woman belonged to, what responsibilities she carried, and what rights she had. And when the lecture ended, Grandfather would sigh, stand up, and declare,
Since you understand now, I won't deceive myself anymore. Secular demon, time to die.
Regarding human nature, Sylvan was entirely professional. He didn't want to dismantle the wall preventing Dis from killing him just because of his curiosity. Compared to the time he went down to the basement to have a heart-to-heart with Mr. Mosan, this would be much more dangerous. The difference between taking risks and being suicidal, Sylvan could still distinguish clear.
Meow, meow.
Sylvan lowered his head, discovering that Pal had been lying beside the sofa without him noticing. These days, Pal seemed listless, as if sick. Sylvan reached out, picking Pal up. Pal didn't resist and no longer had that previous arrogant demeanor. Instead, it showed a kind of weakness, docility. In Sylvan's impression, this cat's expressions had always been vibrant. Woof, woof. In the corner by the living room door, the golden dog rested its chin on the tiles, showing an envious expression. Mr. Hoffen hadn't been discharged from the hospital yet, so his dog was still living in the Inmarai's house. However, the adults and children in the family didn't seem to have much love for pets. Not that they disliked them, but they were also lazy about caring for them. Only Sylvan would spend some time each day taking it for walks around the neighborhood. Sylvan waved at the golden dog and it immediately stood up, sticking out its tongue, looking very happy. It came closer and actively put its head under Sylvan's hand. The cat was lying on his lap, the dog leaning against his side, the lingering fragrance of tea on the table in front, and all inside this large villa. Sylvan suddenly felt days like this weren't so bad. Although he didn't have the ability to change reality, at least he could choose a comfortable sleeping position. Ability. Sylvan suddenly leaned forward. Lying on Sylvan's lap, Pal raised its head, somewhat puzzled. The golden dog stretched its head under his palm, continuing to nuzzle. The dream about Jeff, Mr. Mosen's crying. Could he also have the ability to make the victim under the stage react? If he could say something, then the killer could be identified. Society still passed down stories about forensics, that they could allow victims to speak. And if victims could literally speak, that would certainly be the nightmare of all killers in this world. But Sylvan looked at his left hand again. He had forgotten how many times he had intentionally looked at this scar today. First, not to mention that he didn't yet understand this ability. Even if he really had and possessed this ability, could he use it to help police solve cases and catch killers?
I must be crazy! Ha ha ha!
Sylvan?
Yes, Aunt?
Aunt Mary came up from the basement holding a box in her hand and giving it to Sylvan.
What's this?
Sylvan took the box, opened it, and found a Monroe brand watch. This wasn't considered luxury goods, but its value wasn't low either. This thing cost about 2,000 Lu. Office workers often like to wear this type of watch.
Thank you, Aunt.
Sylvan thought his aunt had bought the watch for him, but unexpectedly she shook her head and said,
It's not from me. Mrs. Hughes had someone deliver it as a gift for you.
Mrs. Hughes? The owner of the crematorium. Aunt Mary lowered her voice, saying,
Although I have a very good relationship with Mrs. Hughes, but
Sylvan had seen Mrs. Hughes teasing Uncle Mason in front about falling while climbing through another woman's window number that day. This was actually like helping her friend warn her husband.
I still have to remind you that this Mrs. Hughes is somewhat amative. You shouldn't associate with her too much, understand?
Just like Uncle Mason, Aunt Mary was distraught that Mrs. Hughes's beckoning finger would entice young, vigorous Sylvan away. Perhaps for Mrs. Hughes, this was just an amusement to dispel boredom and loneliness, but for a young man coming of age, it was the price of having his innocence toyed with. After all, Sylvan was 15, an age when one could pierce through iron. How many young men at this age could resist a woman's temptation? Aunt Mary was doing this for her nephew, not hesitating to speak ill of her friend. Earlier, because Sylvan and Dis had returned, Aunt Mary hadn't dared to take out the watch in front of Dis.
I understand.
Mrs. Hughes was treating him like an innocent child who was easy to hook.
Then should I have someone return this watch to Mrs. Hughes?
There is no need to return it, just accept it. Understanding in your heart is enough. I'll handle the return gift. Consider it a gift between us sisters. However, you should still call now, say thank you, and be polite.
Yes, Aunt.
The number's in the directory.
Yes.
Sylvan picked up the phone and opened the directory beside the phone. Because it was business-related, the crematorium Mrs. Hughes's number was listed first, very easy to find. Making the call. After waiting a long time, no one answered on the other end. Perhaps she was busy? Sylvan hung up and dialed again. Click. This time, someone picked up quickly. Sylvan asked,
Hello, is this the crematorium's number?
There was sound on the other end, but no one spoke. Sylvan asked again.
Hello.
You're disturbing my artistic creation.
This is the end of today's story. Please like and subscribe to support the channel and follow the next developments. Thank you.